open behind us to admit Bob. Wearing just a pair of training pants, he strode into the room on bare feet. Looking at him, I realized that he was pretty damn muscular as well, but his build was much slighter then. Alexander, and the way he always slouched when he walked, hid that. He strode over to the mats but didn't look at Deidre whatsoever, as he turned his back to us. However, I had a clear view of the mating mark that covered his left shoulder blade. Andy leaned over to tug Deidre to his level, and when she did, he pressed a kiss to her cheek and then patted her hand. After that, he ran over to Bob to hug his leg. "Bobby, are we gonna play the Wii again today? Are you gonna teach me to be a ninja?" Bob's posture immediately softened. "Of course we can play Wii, kid, and I'll teach you some ninja moves anytime. Come here." He took Andy to the mats and started demonstrating how to stand and kick and even punch. I wasn't sure how I felt about my baby brother learning to fight, but on the other hand, I knew he wasn't the kind to hurt innocents, and it was good if he could protect himself somewhat. Bob wasn't a rookie either. He didn't have the speed that Alexander or Seriton possessed when they fought, but the techniques were all there. There was a look of determination on his face when he practiced, and I could see him think through strategies. We were all watching when a voice suddenly barked. "Attention please, ladies." Behind us stood a darkly handsome man. He didn't look any younger than Jaden or Alexander. Any human would have estimated him to be about 25 to 28 years old, but looks obviously were deceiving. His hair was such a dark shade of brown that it appeared almost black, and his face was aristocratic. His skin a beautiful olive tone that implied a Mediterranean heritage, just like his eyes that were so dark beneath his sculptured eyebrows that they too appeared black. He was dressed in flowing black pants that looked both stylish and easy to move in, and a black shirt that bared his underarms and flowed over his chest. It showed clearly how he too was muscular to a fault. But hey, all these men were warriors, so it wasn't that strange. His clothes all appeared to be tailor-made to fit him like a glove, and it spoke volumes. This man considered himself well-bred. Like royalty. The way he stood with his chin slightly raised gave me the feeling he was looking down on us with a hint of contempt. I had thought the Nordic Samuel was an arrogant son of a bitch, and Jaden a close second with his teasing comments. But this guy? Phew. It was a wonder he'd managed to get through the door. "I see what you mean, Sarah," I told her with a wink. "Lord Alexander has charged me with training you in the art of self-defense, and as your instructor, I demand your completely attention. I do not tolerate unnecessary talking, and especially not complaining," the infamous Lysander said, a melodic accent filtering through his voice that sounded faintly Greek. After that, he set us to go through a series of exercises, so he could evaluate each of our skills. Deidre soon proved to be quite adequate, and before Lysander could get her started on brushing up her skills, Bob jumped in saying that he'd train her. Lysander looked at Bob with more contempt than he did to Deidre and Sarah, obviously not impressed, but he nodded and pretended he didn't know they were even there. I suppose being the brother of the man he swore allegiance to, he felt like he couldn't really object. After that, he put Sarah through her moves and gave her exercises so she could improve what little skills she had. Sarah moved like a graceful dancer, but it was clear that she had hardly any knowledge of fighting, and especially that she had no desire to learn either. It was funny to watch how every time Lysander turned his back on her, she would go through dance exercises instead. He knew, of course, but again, he didn't say anything. When he turned his dark eyes on me, I swallowed once convulsively before reminding myself that I was in fact Alexander's mate. Deidre behaved submissive to me as if I was her leader, and if Alexander was Lysander's lord, then I was his lady, wasn't I? Yet with the faint sneer on his handsome face as he looked at me, the contempt oozing out of him as he assessed my posture. It was hard not to feel as tiny as a mouse. Hours later, I felt like I had been strung up for a beating. My muscles were each screaming in agony, and my throat felt so dry that I couldn't have been thirstier had I walked through a desert all day. With shaking legs, I forced myself to go through the exercises Lysander had set for me again. I wasn't going to back down. He wouldn't have the pleasure of seeing me give up. Never. Sarah had long since disappeared, flitting out of the room like a butterfly, and Lysander hadn't said a word about it. Just looking after her with a frown on his face, he was dying to give her a piece of his mind, yet he swallowed the words. He didn't hesitate to scold me or Andy about all the things we did wrong, though. At some point, Deidre looked at me and then at Andy, who was still bravely struggling through his own exercises. There was a curious look on his face, determination and something else. Every time he looked at the Greek slave driver, his eyes would narrow as if he was concentrating, and then he'd renew his exercises with vigor, as if he was trying to prove something to the Taoiseach. Deidre intervened when I nodded, excusing herself with Andy because he had schoolwork to do, much to my brother's disgust. Bob followed them out the room without a word, but having seen him spar with Deidre had shown me he was nearly ready to forgive her. That left me alone with the arrogant Greek man, and deciding to put an end to this right away. I swiveled to look at him with a glare. I don't know what your problem is with me, but you can spit it out right now and we'll settle this. I won't have you staring down at me with contempt when I have no clue what I did to deserve it. His sneer intensified. You are human, little girl. Even though it wasn't even true, I was part demon and part angel. I didn't deny it. If he looked down on humans, then he sure as hell didn't deserve my respect. And what are you to make you think you're so much better? I spat as I placed my hands on my hips, staring at him while I imagined that HE was the mouse instead of me. His dark eyes sparkled for a moment before he sauntered over to me, an arrogant smirk on his face. What I am, little girl? I am a Dracos, and I have every right to look down on puny little humans. His eyes blazed red for a short second as if fire danced behind his pupils. Then it was gone, and I wondered if I'd imagined it. The way he loomed over me, his stance intimidating and arrogant, it had my heart beating wildly in my throat, my instincts telling me that this man was the most dangerous predator of all. So you're a shapeshifter that can change into a dragon? I asked, and my voice sounded just the slightest bit hoarse, as fear made my throat constrict. Lysander nodded his head just a fraction before he spoke again. I am Dracos. Consider us the royalty among shifters. Like the lion is the king of the savannah. Cool, I said. I need a shapeshifter to practice this one skill I have. Before he could object or ask what I was talking about, I pulled a dagger from that holster, which I'd faithfully worn all day for Alexander. I slammed it down into his thigh without hesitation. Since he didn't yell out or start fluctuating between shapes, I pulled the dagger out and stabbed his other leg too. I tell you, I wasn't a violent person at all, but with his high and mighty attitude, I was pissed off enough for it. I knew he wouldn't die from it anyway. An ear-piercing roar resounded through the room, echoing against the walls, and I was forced to let go of the dagger, still embedded in his leg, and stumble backwards. Lysander's eyes were definitely engulfed with flames now. Before me, he started growing until all I could see was a black, scaly body, supple and lean with muscle, huge claws that made furrows in the hardwood floor, and a set-off incredibly large black wings shot through with silver. The dragon's head was both the scariest thing I'd ever seen and, at the same time, hauntingly beautiful. Dark-horned ridges and tall, twisted horns with silver scales and a symmetrical pattern, his eyes like furnaces. One claw he raised and swept down to grab me, but instead of terrified that he'd hurt me, I stood still. Calm enveloped me. Stop! The command crackled through the air like a whip, and both the dragon and I looked at the door to see who said it. Well, Alexander. His normally pale skin was lit up again, and his hair fluttered around him in an unseen wind. Power pouring from every pore, his eyes completely black. It told me he was very close to losing his control. Change back, Lysander, now! He commanded before he turned to look at me with a glare. I cringed then. Obviously, he was pissed that I'd stabbed his Taoiseach for no apparent reason. Especially when he wasn't around to heal the guy and make sure I was safe in the process. Clearly, Lysander had lost it when I stabbed him. The dragon was shrinking back to human size now. And then, the impossible happened. He got stuck. First he was a dragon, then he was nearly human, and then he was a human with horns before suddenly half his body broke out in scales again. It was clear Lysander had no control over it. The fluctuations kept happening and I let out a whoop in victory. I did it. See, I did it. You're right, I can catch shifters in between shapes. Alexander didn't share my elation, but strode over to Lysander with an intent look on his face. He stood still in front of the rapidly shape-shifting dragon until suddenly snatching with his hand and withdrawing my dagger from the guy's leg. As it dropped to the floor, I realized the blade had been bent and warped, as if during the shifting it hadn't been able to keep its natural form either. Lysander's shape seemed to stabilize slowly, until a few seconds later he dropped to the floor in human form, butt naked, and obviously unconscious. Well, that was interesting. It seems it works on Dracos. Maybe I just needed to be angry to make it work? Alexander bent down and grabbed first one knife wound and then the other and healed them roughly. Then he slapped Lysander in the face to wake him up. The dragon blinked his eyes dazedly for a moment until they focused on Alexander. Then he flowed to his feet. "My lord, get dressed, lie," Alexander snapped. A blink of an eye later, Lysander wore the same clothes as before again. He bowed to Alexander in submission before shooting me a hate-filled glare from the side, trying to prevent my mate from noticing it. Somehow feeling the need to antagonize the Greek even more, I stuck out my tongue to him. "Brittany, enough of this. Lysander, get to work," my mate growled angrily. Immediately, Lysander fled from the room, happy to be out of the way when Alexander was pissed off. Then my mate turned to focus his glare on me. Alexander didn't say a word to me as he signaled me to follow him, striding out of the room on his long legs. I had to run to catch up to him, and as I did, my muscles protested loudly. I was at least 3 times more tired than I was yesterday, but it was mostly physical exhaustion this time. My mind still felt clear. Alexander stalked through the house as if a thundercloud hung above him, and he glared at Danis when we met him in the hall. I shrugged apologetically at the witch before hurrying after my mate. As I stepped into our bedroom, Alexander used his powers to slam the door shut. The sound echoed around the house loudly, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. "Stop that, Alexander. You don't go around intimidating me. Can't you be happy that I finally did it?" I exclaimed, feeling some of my earlier anger resurface as well. He turned around to face me with those completely black eyes, his fists clenched at his sides. I think he let his gaze drift over my body for a short moment, taking in my disheveled state and sweaty appearance. I was pretty sure my shoulders were slumped because my arms just felt so bloody heavy. Plus, my hair around my face was in complete disarray. Opposed to that, he looked ready to go to a fancy 5-star restaurant, dressed in elegant black slacks and a crisp white shirt. His hair, for once, not hanging across his forehead as if he'd just walked through the wind. I was still standing at the door, and he approached me like a predator stalks its prey. His gait slow and easy, yet oozing danger and maleness. I swallowed when he was almost right in front of me, my heart kicking into overdrive as my instincts told me to run hard and fast. He was doing the power thing again. The currents around him so strong that they were trying to push me to my knees even as they pressed me up against the door. "Oh, I'm glad you managed it, Brittany. It makes me feel much better knowing that you can piss of a 56-ton weighing dragon," he growled, boxing me in against the door, his lower body pressing against me as he leaned his elbows against the door beside my head. "What is it with you and making men lose control of themselves?" he said next, the question rhetorical because he continued, "Do you have a death wish or something?" Another growl erupted from him before he suddenly switched off the power show and turned around. Running his hands through his hair roughly, as if he was utterly frustrated with me, he stalked away again and disappeared into the bathroom. Shocked by what had just happened, I stared after him. Did he really feel like I was a burden he had to protect all the time? Was that why he was so frustrated? Why did my body respond in fear of him now, and not when Lysander and his dragon from nearly swiped me with his huge claw? I slid down the door to pull my knees up against my chest, wrapping my arms around them. A heavy feeling on my chest and a constricting in my throat warned me that I was about to cry. What was wrong with me anyway? I just totally stabbed a stranger for no reason other than practice, and that he pissed me off. The fact that he acted all high and mighty shouldn't be enough to make me react that way? Oh no. Was this my demon blood acting out? Was it? Agramokrowi? Alexander's voice penetrated my hazy thoughts. "Come here, Britt." He was kneeling in front of me and easily gathered me in his arms, tugging me against his chest as he lifted me off the floor. "I'm not just mad at you, Brittany. It's been a rough day," Alexander whispered in my hair. He carried me to the bathroom and set me down on the counter next to the sink, running water and then a wet cloth that he ran over my face gently. "Come on a run. What you did was very dangerous." I told you he was very young. He was making an effort to sound gentle, but his frustration still came through. "I know. I didn't plan to do that. It just happened." He was being such an asshole. Alexander. What if it's my demon heritage? I don't want to be evil. Why did I stab him? The question spilled out of me rapidly, and I finally looked back up at him. He changed his clothes, wearing only loose-ripped jeans, and his hair was wet as if he'd splashed water in his face. He wore a solemn expression, but his eyes were their usual stormy gray again. "It's okay, Britt. You're not evil by a long shot. I'm sure Lysander deserved it. I know he can be a pompous prick. He thinks he's got a lot to prove. You know, bad family, bad childhood. It's made him like this, but I swear it's just an act." "Oh," I replied stupidly, sniffling a little. "Why don't you go take a shower and freshen up and we'll talk this over during dinner?" "Just the two of us?" Alexander offered. He ran his hand through my hair and nodded. "He sure made you work hard, didn't he?" "Much harder than I did. I'll have to have words with him about that." I shook my head. "You'll do no such thing. You're not going to say a word, okay? I'm pretty sure he'll sing a different tune now that I stabbed him. But, you might surreptitiously drop on him that Twanek stick is my grandfather. He was all high and mighty because he thinks I'm human." Alexander sighed but nodded. "Fine, now go shower. I'll get Danis to send food to the small dining room for us. I'm going to make some calls in the bedroom." He was still mad. I could tell by the way his shoulders were tensed and the atmosphere around him was heavy with it. The door shut, with more force than necessary behind him on his way out. I stepped into the shower and allowed the hot water to ease some of the aches in my muscles and wash away the evidence of the hard workout. I tried not to look at the stains of blood that washed from my hands. My body felt incredibly sluggish when I stepped out of the shower and dried myself off. I had no fresh clothes here, but I didn't think it mattered. If we'd be having a small dinner together, it was okay if I just wore my PJs. Not like Alexander would care, right? I was just about to step into the bedroom wrapped in my towel when I noticed the topaz fabric on the counter. Oh wow. It was beautiful. A simple yet elegant dress, the exact same shade as my eyes. How did that get here? Did Alexander teleport it in here? I assumed he wanted me to wear it, so I slid into it carefully, slipping on the lacy black panties along with it. Typical of him to pick a pair like that. Dressed, I slipped on the matching pair of pumps and did some light makeup. I couldn't go without now that he'd made me dress up like this. When I was done, I stepped into the bedroom looking around me hesitantly, but the room was deserted. "Downstairs, Britt," Alexander said lightly in my mind. When I descended the stairs, I found him waiting for me at the bottom, wearing slacks again and a fresh dark blue shirt that matched his eyes. He looked absolutely beautiful even though he was still frowning, his features ascetic with hard lines and angles. He held out a hand for me and I took it, his grip gentle as he led me through a corridor to another part of the house. There was a separate dining room all set for us with one plate set for me and a tall metal container on the other side. Alexander pulled my chair out and then sat down across from me, focusing his eyes on me as I hungrily dug into the food. He screwed open the container and I caught a metallic whiff for a short moment. Blood, no doubt. Samuel do Alex me some of his blood occasionally, but he doesn't feel much for the whole me sucking some part of him thing. Neither do I. He was silent for the rest of the dinner, but just as I emptied my plate, he nodded. "Now tell me what happened that made you stab him a gramokoi." It wasn't a request, but an order, and for once, I didn't fight the compulsion to obey him. I told him everything about my day right until the moment I stabbed Lysander. I hoped he better understood now why I did what I did. I didn't like it when he was mad with me. He was being extremely polite, and even the tense atmosphere around him had disappeared, but I knew it was still there. When I was finished, I nodded to him. "Will you tell me about your day now?" I really didn't get why he was so pissed about the whole Lysander incident. He had said there was more to it, that he'd had a rough day. Alexander turned his stormy eyes on me and nodded slowly. "Very well, Britt. I will tell you. I suppose now that I have you as my mate, I should share things like this with you. Do not be shocked." His last words were an order spoken while he drummed his fingers on the table, an unconscious movement that told me he was worried I would be shocked anyhow. He suddenly stiffened, and then a few short seconds later, the door slammed open, and Jaden stormed into the room. His normally pitch-black hair a mess, and partially plastered to his forehead with blood. His shirt in tatters, and part of the knee of his pants missing. Underneath the tears, more blood visible. It was obvious he'd been in a fight, a bad one. "Alexander," the panther exclaimed. "There was an attack. We drove them off, but they took one of our men." He panted as if he'd run a marathon, bending over and resting his hands on his knees to catch his breath. "You better come with me to check the perimeter." Alexander was already on his feet, striding over to him. Without a word, he grabbed Jaden's head and healed him. "That was one nasty head wound, boy. Show me the way. Jaden scoffed. Who are you calling boy here? This way. As he spoke, he straightened up and his clothing melted away to make place for a fresh pair of jeans and a shirt, any bloodstains completely disappearing. They started walking out of the room and I hurried after them, not about to allow them to leave without me. It was a good thing neither of them appeared to be able to teleport, or I would have been left behind. As it was, they didn't seem to notice me hurrying after them. As they left through the back door and started walking across the large garden behind the house, Alexander finally noticed me. He turned his stormy eyes to full glare mode and said with a voice that demanded obedience, "Hell no, Brittany, you are staying inside the house." My answer was immediate and without thought. Hell no, Alexander. He was on me in 2 steps, grabbing me tightly in his arms and depositing me on the other side of the door jamb. You are staying here. I will not have you run the risk of getting hurt. They might come back. You do not want to see this. I want to be by your side. I might be able to help, I told him. You'll have to lock me up to keep me from following. Then I will, was his very short answer. Jaden, take her to my room and keep her there. The panther met my eyes, and I could tell he disagreed, but he still shrugged and reached over to grab onto my arm. Your wish is my command, he muttered. Alexander, I'm not some princess you can lock inside to keep safe. How can you do this? I thought we were in this relationship together, as equals, but apparently not. Fine, go away. I don't want to see you then. I ripped my arm out of Jaden's grip and started stalking back into the house. Brittany, for fuck's sake. Alexander was at my side in a flash. Fine, you can come, but you promise me to stay close, and if I think there's danger, you will go with Jaden without a fight. I wanted to protest more because he couldn't just get away with behavior like that, but I realized it wasn't the time or the place for it. We'd definitely discuss this later. I knew he was a 1,500-year-old vampire with ALL of North America under his command. He was bound to be a little dominant, and I could deal with that, but not if he started threatening to lock me up just because there might be a little danger. With a huff, I allowed him to take my hand as we restarted our trek through the garden to a high metal fence on the edge of it. There, I saw several dark figures emerging from the shadows at our approach. There was 2 vampires, and I think the third was a shapeshifter, but I really couldn't tell what kind. On the ground with them was another shape, and in the dark, I couldn't see what that was. My lord, one of the vampires immediately exclaimed, saluting formally when he spotted Alexander. My mate didn't reply, however, but went to one knee beside the shape on the floor. He's dead, my lord, the vampire mumbled. Still, Alexander reached out his hand and touched the shape, which I could now tell was a body. Beside me, light flared to life to illuminate it, and the sight made my stomach roil in shock. There was blood everywhere, and one limb had been torn off, but it was so badly disfigured that I couldn't tell if it was an arm or a leg. The smell alone, compared with the sight, made me turn around and stumble to my knees, my meal of before forcing its way up. As I puked my guts out in the most ungracious way on the grass, I heard a voice behind me snicker as if they found it amusing. The sound was cut off by an angry bark from Alexander. A second later, I felt cool hands on the back of my neck, holding my hair away from my face. There, I told you it was better if you stayed inside, Alexander whispered in my ear, tugging me into the safety of his arms to hold me against his hard chest. That's one of Thornton's men for sure, I recognize him. Seems like Deidre was right after all, Alexander said, meant for the rest of the group to hear. Who did they take? Mattis. There was a silence after that one spoken name, and I instinctively knew everyone thought the poor guy was dead too. Judging by the marks on the ground and the fence and the injuries each of the other bore, there had been a hefty struggle. Get 3 more units to sweep the perimeter and keep the same number active at all times. I want no one to venture out alone. Do not engage unless you're sure you can take them out. We'll take no captives. The way Alexander spoke made it clear he'd dealt with situations like this before and knew how to handle them. Feeling like I had to make up for losing my dinner after insisting I come, I straightened and pushed Alexander away from me. There had to be something I could do, right? I wasn't a detective or anything but. My eyes fell on the disfigured body again. It appeared to be male by the size of it and was lying face down. There were gashes running over it that looked like he'd been mauled by a huge animal, and it was clear that was Jaden's handiwork. I felt a slight tugging on my mind, and then before I could stop myself, I'd taken the few steps to reach the body and touched my hand to the head. The skull had been bashed in, and as such most of the brains had been destroyed, a sure way to kill a vampire. I heard a collective gasp behind me from the others, and Alexander exclaiming my name in warning. As I touched the head, a warmth spread through me, and then I saw images flash before my eyes. They appeared to be memories, but they were definitely not mine. It was so fast that I couldn't make out what they were. After a short moment, they slowed down until I could see one image clearly. With long, elegant white blonde hair, straight as a ruler, and held together with an old-fashioned black ribbon, Thornton, as always, looked like a lord stepped out of the 17th century. That era had certainly suited the asshole. He wore a tailor-made suit that came right out of a fashion magazine and made him look like a CEO or something like that. He had the same aura anyway, cold and cunning. I really didn't know why I still worked for the old shark. He was as vicious and mean as any vampire his age. Pity he looked no older than 30. As I stepped up closer to him, I bowed my head respectfully. Oh, how it grated to have to do that. It should be me on that throne of his, ruling this territory. Thornton wasn't all that powerful. If only I could get enough support among his followers, I could overthrow him. Then I could do anything I wanted. No one could tell me what to do, and I could have all my desires fulfilled. Give me the girl. They took Deidre and hit her, but it's no matter. I want that so-called mate of Alexander. She's human. It can't be hard. Get her. I want her to be mine. Thornton's voice cut across the room like a whip. I cringed involuntarily, and then told myself again. Soon, I wouldn't have to cringe from the likes of him. Soon, they would be the ones groveling. Get the girl. You can count on me, I told Thornton, coating my voice in sugar. Don't harm her unless it's absolutely necessary. I want to take care of her personally. It'll be a lesson for Alexander to see his mate degraded. The disgusting man rubbed his hands together in anticipation at the thought alone, and then nodded. Go. I almost ran from the room. With a gasp, I stumbled backwards, only to be caught in Alexander's arms. They were coming for me. Thornton wants me alive so he can. I shivered as I remembered the depth of deprivation of the mind I just touched. Remembered the associations he'd linked with Thornton's words. Torture, rape. It was all in a day's work for this guy, even though he'd labeled Thornton as disgusting. It was only because he wasn't getting his own sick desires fulfilled. I straightened my back and stood up, shrugging out of Alexander's grasp to stand on my own. He was a child molester. I spat out, no longer feeling sick or queasy about the brutal death this man had suffered. You should have ripped off all his limbs before you smashed his head. Jaden? A gasp, and then the panther said, If I'd known that I would have, trust me. But the bastard was weak. He nearly died from the shock when I ripped off his arm. I didn't know you were such a violent person, Brittany. Stabbing Lysander, stabbing me, ripping this guy to pieces. Laughter all around, and then Alexander tugged me back into his arms. She's not a violent person at all. But as you can all see, she knows when violence unfortunately is needed. So when were you going to tell me you can read memories from practically unsalvageable brains? Jaden added. I was being guided back towards the house with sure hands and firm steps. Obviously, Alexander had decided there was nothing else we could do there. I didn't know I could, Jay. I don't often get in contact with dead brains, you know. I shivered as I realized what I'd done. I felt disgusting after having touched the memories of that mind. Plus, my legs really felt like they were about to give now. I was so tired. It's quite something, Britt. It's why I touched the corpse in the first place. Because I have some small talent in it, but not even Sarah could have gotten anything from that. Had the head just been severed, it would have been a piece of cake. But this, a proud pat on my shoulder from my mate, and then he suddenly swung me up in his arms. You do realize that with Thornton's plans confirmed, I suddenly did gain the right to lock you in my room to keep you safe? Teasing words spoken with a grim look in his eyes that told me he was only half joking. You are not locking me in anywhere. I'll develop teleportation skills and teleport myself out or something if you do, I exclaimed angrily. But after those words, I felt drained and a sliver of fear shot up my spine. Alexander, will this always stay like this? Or will the threat of Thornton eventually go away? I don't want to have to fear for my life all the time. I'll kill him if he comes near you, was Alexander's simple answer to that. A second later, we stepped into the kitchen, where Jaden excused himself to look over more security details. muttering angrily about Lysander having been moved away again, so he had to manage things on his own. Something about Lysander being good at doing the stupid job. Back inside the house, I made a beeline for the shower again. I just had to cleanse myself after that horrendous experience. Alexander watched me go, but didn't comment on it. As I shrugged out of the beautiful dress, I noticed that the hem was stained with crimson droplets, like Deidre's tears. A pity, but I didn't think I'd ever want to wear it again anyway. Not now that it had been soiled with tonight's nightmares. After my shower, I still didn't feel the same, but I went to check on Andy anyhow. I felt the need to assure myself that he was fine. Surprisingly, I found Alexander in Andy's bedroom standing at the foot of the castle-like bed with his arms folded across his chest. There was a frown creasing his forehead as if he was lost deep in thought, bad thoughts. He simply lifted one arm and tugged me under it so he could hold me against his chest tightly. The gesture was absent-minded and showed me how he felt the need for physical reassurance just like I did. Andy was fast asleep in the bed, his arms thrown up across the pillow the way babies and young children often sleep. He was a little old to sleep that way, but he was so mature with his observations, usually, that I didn't care. He was softly snoring and his expression was peaceful. It was much easier to forget the disgusting memories I'd seen now. "You needed to check on him too?" Alexander whispered. I nodded as I focused on the slowly rising and falling of my brother's chest. The man killed was one of Thornton's generals. Karsten, Jules Karsten, can you confirm that? Or was it impossible to get his name from the memories you took? I closed my eyes. It was him, I'm sure. I had the image of that man clear in my mind's eye, the way he remembered himself in the mirror. He was young and handsome, charismatic with a smooth voice that he used to charm everyone. I shivered when I remembered how he charmed little kids to come with him. For once, the violent image of the man's death actually made me feel better. I will make today's nightmares go away, Alexander whispered as he spoke, his lips brushed against my earshell. I shivered again, but it was in a good way this time. I loved this man with all my heart, and I loved how he had put aside his anger for now so he could reassure me. So he could make me feel better, even though it was my own stubbornness that had caused me nightmares tonight. He'd wanted to protect me from this. Although he had not gone about it the right way, I understood his actions better. It was the words, "You do not want to see this," that I remembered now. I allowed him to lead me away from Andy's room, although he paused at the door a moment with a focused look. My skin prickled. Back in our bedroom, he undressed me with a flick of his hand, the clothes simply melting from my body. His own followed the same way, but were replaced so quickly with sweatpants that I couldn't even catch a glimpse. "You will not touch me tonight, a gramo groi." It was a command, a darkly spoken one in a husky voice that promised all kinds of heaven and hell, sweet torture. He was in a dark mood still, this mate of mine. It would be dangerous to make him lose control tonight. I obeyed as he told me to lie down. He made good on his promise and took all the nightmares away, loving my body so tenderly that I was lost in oblivion. I didn't know he could be so sweet and loving, so painfully tender. Especially with the mood he'd been in, it was amazing. There is a problem was exactly eating my dealing in Kate and his sensual temptations. The missing guard had been found. Or, well, parts of him at least. Alexander received the news from Jaden with a stony face, then cast me one look. It clearly said, "Do you wish to see?" Surprised by that, I asked, "You're not going to force me to stay inside?" He shook his head. "I wish to keep the brutality of my world